Hello again, and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. It's Monday the 1st of August. I'm Andrew Wilson, and this is Scotland at 7. This evening, I have the latest daily update from Ukraine on day 159 of the illegal Russian war of aggression. Then I will introduce our guest for this evening, and then together we will look at today's headlines from Scotland and around the world. The Sierra Leone flagged ship Razzoni, carrying 26,000 tons of corn, has left the port of Odessa, destined for Lebanon. It is the first departure since the start of the Russian invasion, according to Ukraine's infrastructure ministry. Russia is moving large numbers of troops to Ukraine's south in preparation for a Ukrainian counteroffensive, according to Ukraine's deputy head of military intelligence. The Ukrainian President, Volodymyr Zelensky, said Russia was relocating some of its troops from their positions in the east to the south in order to push towards Kherson's regional capital as well as the Zaporizhia region. Hundreds of thousands of civilians have been urged to evacuate the frontline eastern Donetsk region, the scene of fierce clashes with the Russian military. More than 50,000 children are still in the region, according to local officials. Russia claims that 5 people were injured after a Ukrainian drone strike on its Black Sea Fleet headquarters, prompting officials there to cancel festivities planned for Navy Day. Russian strikes hit the southern Ukrainian port city of Mykolaiv earlier on Sunday, wounding 3 people and damaging homes and schools, according to the city's mayor, Alexander Senkevich. Russian shelling on Mykolaiv is reported to have killed one of Ukraine's wealthiest men, Alexei Vadatursky, and his wife Raisa. Vadatursky headed the grain production and export business Nibulon, which included a fleet of bulk grain carrier ships. The International Committee of the Red Cross has not yet received permission to visit the building in Olenivka, where at least 50 prisoners and Ukrainian prisoners of war were killed, it said yesterday. Russia said it had invited experts from the UN and the Red Cross to examine the deaths in the interests of conducting an objective investigation. President Zelensky denounced the attack as a war crime. 200 Russian Marines from the 810th Naval Infantry Brigade refused to return to fight in the southern regions of Ukraine, according to Ukraine's Defense Ministry Intelligence Directorate. And Ukraine's harvest this year could be half its usual amount because of the Russian invasion, President Zelensky has claimed. Ukrainian harvest this year is under the threat to be twice less, the Ukrainian president said in comments, likely to intensify fears of global hunger. Now, we are lucky enough to be joined this evening by Martyn Day MP. Martyn has been the MP for Linlithgow and East Falkirk since 2015. He's the Shadow SNP spokesperson, Health and Social Care, and he currently serves on the Health and Social Care Committee and the Petitions Committee in the House of Commons. Martyn, good evening. How are you keeping?
Not bad. Nice to be with you today, and I'm pleased to be with you from the constituency, which is a lot more fun than in the madhouse at Westminster.
Very much so, Martyn. We're delighted that you've had a chat, that you've got the time and you've been able to come and join us on Broadcasting Scotland this evening. Our first story this evening is that a ship carrying Ukrainian grain has left the port of Odessa for the first time since the start of the Russian invasion, according to Ukraine's infrastructure ministry. The Sierra Leone flagged ship Razzoni, carrying 26,000 tons of corn, finally set sail for the Lebanon this morning after weeks of negotiations between Ukraine and Russia, led by Turkey and the United Nations. Russia has been blockading Ukraine's ports since the start of the war, stoking a worldwide grain shortage that has caused the UN to warn of a looming hunger catastrophe. Alexander Kubrakov, Ukraine's infrastructure minister, said, Ukraine, together with our partners, has taken another step today in preventing world hunger. Kubrakov stressed that Ukraine had done everything to restore the ports and said the lifting of the blockade would give Ukraine's economy a $1 billion boost in foreign exchange revenue. The Kremlin said the news of the departure was very positive, according to Reuters. Turkey's defense ministry said that more ships will follow. Ukraine is one of the world's biggest grain producers. About 20 million tonnes of grain is reportedly stuck in Ukraine, waiting to be exported. The blockade has caused a worldwide grain shortage and price rises, which pushed some countries that are reliant on grain imports, mainly in the Middle East and Africa, towards famine. Alexander Kubrakov said that 16 loaded vessels had been stuck in Ukraine's ports since the Russian invasion began, and that officials planned for the ports to regain full transport capacity in the coming weeks. The UN's Joint Coordination Centre, set up to facilitate the deal, said it authorised the ship to leave the port and that it would be monitoring the vessel as it sailed through the agreed path. The world is watching to see if Russia sticks to its side of the bargain after an attack on the port of Odessa just over a week ago. So, Martyn, Dmitry Baranov, who's deputy head of Ukraine's Seaport Authority, says that at least 68 vessels have been stuck in the country's Black Sea ports since the invasion, and almost half of those are going to be are loaded with grain. So, do you think is there a prospect of either further attacks on Odessa or potentially the risk of attacks on these vessels?
I suppose that's the big risk. I mean, on the face of it, the situation does seem to be one of good news, certainly for the world addressing the hunger shortage, and also as a success for what appears to be diplomacy. So, on the face of that, that's a really strong positive. Now, Lloyd's Insurance have obviously set up an insurance scheme for these ships. It'll be a higher premium than otherwise would be. So they obviously recognise an element of risk, and I think anyone in that area would be expecting a degree of risk, not just from the minefields and the shipping situation there, but also from the actual ongoing conflict. So, yeah, it's one we're going to have to watch and patiently wait and see what actually happens. But on the face of it, good news, and let's hope it all works out.
Absolutely, Martyn. Thank you. Yes, very much a case of fingers crossed. A farmer who was asked about the development, a Ukrainian farmer who was asked about these developments, said this afternoon, "I don't see this shipping corridor lasting into the new year unless there are big security guarantees, like NATO guarding the ports." What do you think of the prospects for those sorts of big security guarantees, and what do you think would be the associated risks if it became the case that NATO, for example, was protecting these ports?
I mean, the risk obviously is that we get an escalated conflict with other parties being drawn further into it. Um, we just have to wait and see, and I think I probably take a degree of scepticism to how long this will last. But it's certainly there just now. A deal's been reached, so let's just hope it runs for as long as is possible, and hopefully it sets the scene for a negotiated peace, which would be in everybody's outcome interest.
Absolutely, Martyn. That's right. And actually, I was going to ask you about something connected with that. I was wondering if what you think the prospects are for this current UN and Turkey brokered deal sticking or persisting. Particularly with thinking of the economic aspect here, we talk about the economic fronts in this
Mm.
current illegal war from time to time, and the Ukrainian authorities have said that restarting the export of grain will generate something like $1 billion
Yeah.
US in foreign exchange revenue for Ukraine at a time when much of the rest of the Ukrainian economy has stopped. So, do you think that the both parties are going to be able to make this agreement persist, or will Russia become too fixated on the revenue that is coming into Ukraine and potentially want to stem the flow of those funds?
I genuinely don't know, and I'm not gonna guess. It certainly is an interesting one, and you're right. They are predicting $1 billion worth of revenue, and of course they are fighting a war and they're needing every penny for arms and equipment. So it's an interesting one that for the Russia have done a deal that allows this to go ahead. So is it a permanent deal or is it just a temporary respite? Only time will tell.
Absolutely, Martyn. Time will tell, and I suspect we'll come back to this as we see the further sailings of vessels leaving Ukraine, and with any luck, the and a following wind, we see the risk of widespread hunger, especially in the Middle East and Africa, begin to recede once grain starts to move again. But let's move on to our next item this evening. because the UK government has been urged to provide additional funding for public sector pay deals, or
Mm.
the Scottish government may be unable to fund equivalent offers without cuts to public services, according to the Deputy First Minister, John Swinney. In a letter to the Chancellor of the Exchequer, I should say current Chancellor of the Exchequer, Nadhim Zahawi, Mr Swinney outlined concerns that last year's UK spending review, which determined the majority of the current Scottish budget, did not take into account the level of pay increases recently proposed by independent pay review bodies. Mr Swinney also warned that the UK spending review did not consider the wider effects of rising inflation, and that without any further funding, the Scottish Government may only be able to propose similar pay rises by reducing budgets elsewhere, which would have a knock-on impact on the public sector's ability to respond more widely to the Tory cost of living crisis. On the 15th of July, the finance ministers for the three devolved governments wrote to the Chancellor outlining economic areas of concern ahead of the forthcoming UK budget. So, Martyn, first of all,
Mm.
is a wider review of the Scottish budget payment from Westminster overdue, given the effects of the cost of living crisis? It struck me that everything from feeding prisoners in jail to heating hospitals is now more expensive.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've thought for months now that there should have been already by this point an emergency budget at a UK level to tackle the issues that we're seeing. So it's hardly surprising that the devolved nations are seeing a consequential effect from the lack of action from the UK there. And it just highlights for everyone how inadequate the current constitutional settlement is, that we don't have the full economic levers to just determine things for ourselves, borrow internationally, do whatever we need to do to settle our own books. We cannot in Scotland, of course, run a deficit. We've got to run the budget that we're given. So when our expenditure is higher than was forecast, you've got a problem. And that is the fundamental point that obviously John Swinney's made very eloquently to the current UK Chancellor.
Thanks, Martyn. We should perhaps explain that John Swinney was writing today because the Finance Secretary, Kate Forbes, is now on her maternity leave.
That's right, yeah.
The thinking of the UK politics for a moment, how do you think, or what's your view about how either or both Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss, whoever becomes the next Prime Minister, how do you think that they will handle this request from, well, the requests, the points that are being made by all three devolved governments?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure which Tory leader is the more scary option. I think the one that's going to get it, with the sound of things, is probably going to be Truss. Um, I think they're disaster zones either way. Both are playing to a very base populist right-wing Tory membership audience. What they do once they're in government may be a different thing, of course, but their track record has been as part of Johnson's extreme right-wing government that I don't think we'll see anything better than what we've seen so far. Indeed, probably a lot worse. I don't think they have a plan. I think they're just opportunist populists, and there's no real road for them to take. It's just going to be chaos. So I don't. I'm not particularly optimistic of the outcome.
No, absolutely, Martyn. And thinking of the opportunistic nature of many of the current Westminster cabinet and the way in which it's operated, probably for the duration of this government, to be
Yeah.
honest, do you think that? Well, it is currently Nadhim Zahawi who is Chancellor.
Mhm.
Do you think there's the prospect that he will just ignore these requests from all three devolved governments because he knows perfectly well he may not be Chancellor by September?
I think that's highly likely. I mean, and to be fair to him, if he was to accede to the request in the interim, he would need to take the money from somewhere or find it. So he probably isn't going to bother making that decision until we find out who the new chancellor is after the 5th of September.
And in the context of the increasing cost of living crisis and
Mm,
reports almost on a daily basis that the situation is deteriorating and deteriorating
yeah.
significantly and deteriorating significantly very quickly, is that in any way appropriate for the Westminster government apparently to ignore this issue?
Well, I don't think it is appropriate for them to ignore it, but I think that's probably the initial course of action until they come up with their smoke and mirrors plan to address it. I mean, we've tried for years to get them to address fuel poverty. They've dragged their feet over that. Prior to the escalating fuel prices, we know that 30% of excess winter deaths were caused by inadequate heating. That situation is going to be far worse this winter because of the rising prices, which are now for many people unaffordable. So yeah, we've got a crisis that needs tackled now. It needed tackled months ago. It's now absolutely critical, and when we come back in September, there will be precious little time to address this catastrophe facing us for the winter.
Absolutely, Martyn. Thank you. And as you say, September feels far too late to be attempting to make
Yeah.
sufficiently material changes and taking appropriate steps to address the challenges. But let's have a look at this crisis from another perspective now, because the number of people seeking help because they cannot afford both food and energy has risen more than threefold in a year, according to new data that highlights the increasingly tough choices households face between heating and eating.
Yeah.
The figures, published by Citizens Advice, lay bare the difficulties caused by spiralling domestic energy costs, which charities say are driving millions into fuel poverty. The cap on average household gas and electricity bills in the UK, set by the energy regulator Ofgem, is likely to soar in October from £1,971 to £3,500, according to forecasts issued last week. The level of the cap will be revealed on 26th of August, and further rises are possible in January. This prompted a clamour for more support from the government and the two Tory leadership contenders, Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss. But the new data shows that the number of people struggling to eat and pay for energy has already surged, even before the new cap kicks in. Between April and June last year, 297 people contacted Citizens Advice for help with both food bank referrals and money to top up their energy prepayment meters. In the same period in 2022, the number of people suffering both problems surged to 1,002, an increase of 237% in the space of a year. Morgan Wild, who's the head of policy at Citizens Advice, said the numbers were truly shocking. That's people who literally can't afford to either keep their lights on or put food on the table, he said. Given the predicted increase in the energy price cap, the National Energy Action Charity has added 500,000 households to its estimate of those facing fuel poverty. That's defined as spending more than 10% of income on energy. The charity, which advises people on how to manage energy bills, now predicts that 8.7 million households, more than 1 in 3 in the UK, will find themselves in fuel poverty once the next price cap comes into effect in October. The NEA said the choice between food and energy isn't the only one forced by poverty. Some people are choosing between food and vital medical equipment like oxygen machines, said Peter Smith, the NEA's Director of Policy and Advocacy. He said that the government's £400 rebate on bills was welcome but insufficient, given it was introduced in May when energy prices were forecast to be much lower. The new Prime Minister needs to act, and act urgently, to save millions from the potentially catastrophic winter ahead, he said. So, Martyn, what are you seeing and hearing in your inbox and your in tray from your constituents regarding the rising cost of energy in the UK?
Yeah, I mean, the energy was a critical issue in my constituency even before the current round of fuel price rises. It is now, it's astronomical increases that people are seeing. We're going to be looking at a situation next year, and it will be this period for some time after that that we'll be looking at around an average of 4,000 a year for household bills for energy. And because of the way the price cap works, that price will, even if the energy costs come down, that price will stay higher for a while for the companies to recoup the money they've been losing. And the energy companies have been losing money, and various ones have been going bust as well. So we have a real absolute problem here that needs addressed, and it needs addressed incredibly quickly, because it's not just unable to heat their houses, it then affects their food, it affects their ability to do other aspects of their lives, and it impacts on health. So we end up all paying for it in the long term. I mean, we need to kind of find a way of funding the essential heating for the most vulnerable and the poorest in our society. And the current energy price cap, while it does something, it doesn't do enough, in my opinion. The situation would be worse if we didn't have it, But we need something different that actually addresses the real underlying problems. We probably need a social tariff for the most vulnerable in our society, because how else do they heat their homes? You know, we're all going to have to pay for it.
That's a good point, Martin. And of course, those who are least able to afford energy at the moment, who use prepayment meters, pay a higher tariff
Yeah.
as it is. So there's some significant changes required there. I was also going to ask you if the NEA are correct and they with their prediction that more than 1 in 3 homes in the UK will find themselves in fuel poverty from October. What do you think the wider societal implications of that level of poverty are going to be? I've seen people starting to talk about civil unrest.
Well, I suspect people won't quite be manning the machine guns at barricades any time this winter. But I get the point you're making. You know, people are going to be in a lot of pain. They are going to be struggling, and unfortunately, there isn't a lot they can do if they don't have the money to pay for the heating, pay for the food, get the kids their clothes. You know, something has to give, and it's just a very painful experience. And unfortunately, what it will be that gives will be people's health, and we'll end up paying for it in the long term through the health service for years to come. So we're all going to be paying for this problem. At some point, we might as well just bite the bullet and address it now.
That's a very good point, Martin. Thank you. We'll look at the cost of living crisis from a different direction now, because more than 1 in 8 UK households fear that they have no further way to make cuts to afford any sharp increases in annual energy bills this autumn. More than a quarter of households earning less than £20,000 worry they will be unable to cope with higher bills, with families in Yorkshire, the South West, and Northern Ireland the least confident about
Mm.
covering their costs. That's according to the latest Rebuilding Britain index of 20,000 people prepared by Legal and General. Almost half of households in Scotland say they do not feel confident that they will be able to maintain their current lifestyle in 12 months' time, compared to almost 3/4 of households in London. The latest evidence of pressure on households emerges amid the looming prospect of inflation hitting 12% this autumn,
Mhm.
after dearer fuel and food prices pushed the official measure of the cost of living to a 40-year high of 9.4% in June. A 1 month jump in petrol prices not seen since at least the late 1980s, coupled with across the board increases in food staples such as eggs, milk, cheese, and vegetables, sent the UK's annual inflation rate soaring. The amount that UK consumers borrowed rose by the fastest rate in 3 years last month as households struggled to cope with the rising cost of living. People borrowed an additional £1.8 billion in consumer credit last month, up from a 900 million increase in May, according to the latest Bank of England data. Pressure on households is expected to ramp up this autumn as the price of essentials, from clothing to food, continues to rise alongside higher energy bills. The report underlines that the cost of living crisis is increasing the inequalities between different parts of the UK. Commenting, the SNP MSP Rona Mackay said, "This is yet another deeply worrying report that lays bare the painful reality for households across Scotland right now, and the brutal consequences of the cost of living with a Westminster crisis. For decades, Scotland has been let down by Westminster, and that neglect is now getting worse as we see the Tories' failure to act leading to an increase in the inequalities between different parts of the United Kingdom." So, Martin, it recently emerged that a fifth of UK households now have an average shortfall of £60 a week between what they earn and what they need to cover essentials, such as energy, food, transport, and rent. And that's as the rising cost of living leaves people with the lowest amount of spare cash in almost 5 years. That's according to data from the ASDA income tracker collated by the Centre for Business and Economic Research. Families operating at the moment with an average shortfall of £60 a week, that's not sustainable, is it?
Definitely not. I mean, there's not much you can add to that. If family budgets are running pretty much a deficit, then yeah, there's just a lot of pain and misery of debt being built up, and at some point that becomes unsustainable and unsupportable. And then what happens? So yeah, definitely not sustainable.
Thanks, Martin. And Nigel Wilson, who's the chief exec of Legal and General, said, Many households across the UK are currently facing very tough financial choices. However, what is most concerning is that the impact of the crisis is being felt more severely in some parts of the UK than in others. He said this threatens to widen the existing demographic and geographic inequalities that the levelling up agenda was designed to address. So, Martyn, what do you think are the prospects for Prime Minister Johnson's keynote policy of, quote, levelling up, unquote?
Well, I never thought the policy was about levelling up. I always thought it was about political manipulation. So I'm hardly surprised that it's not making any real impact. Um, but yeah, we fundamental underlying inequalities are there and they're not being addressed. And I think all of this problem of price increases tells us that it's not wages that are pushing up inflation. We've got a problem that needs addressed. People need to be able to afford the basics to have a decent standard of life.
Absolutely, Martin. Thank you. Now, we'll look at the economic crisis from a third perspective now, because UK business leaders are slashing investment plans as soaring prices, Brexit trading difficulties, and political uncertainty all leave bosses pessimistic about the economic outlook. As many firms are now planning to cut investment as to increase it, according to the Institute of Directors' latest poll of business chiefs. That is the weakest reading since October 2020, as nervous firms rein in spending. UK businesses' investment intentions have been falling steadily since the start of the year as input costs have soared and the economy has slowed, undermining efforts to lift productivity. Business leaders are also less upbeat about their own prospects, with over half saying economic conditions in the UK are having a negative impact on their organisations, along with soaring energy costs and skills shortages. The IOD's Economic Confidence Index, which measures business leaders' views of the UK economic prospects, remained very low at minus 54 in July, only slightly higher than June's 60, minus 60. 69% of bosses were either very or quite pessimistic about the UK economy, while just 15% were optimistic about the outlook. Inflation, now at a 40-year high, was the most common reason for pessimism, cited by a third of firms. Nearly 20% of the pessimistic bosses said difficulties in the UK's trading relationship with the EU were their main worry, as the introduction of customs checks and delays at the border have hampered exports. Official data has shown business investment stalled after the 2016 EU referendum. It then plunged when the COVID-19 pandemic began and was still 9.1% below pre-pandemic levels earlier this year. The survey took place between the 13th and the 28th of July as the Conservative Party leadership race to replace Boris Johnson began. So, Martyn, in terms of the responses we're hearing from the contenders in the car crash of the Titans, which is the Conservative Party leadership race, Liz Truss, who, as you say, is currently front runner, has pledged to introduce low tax, light regulation investment zones across the UK if she comes to power. Now, in fairly simplistic terms, if low tax really was the answer, then surely Somalia would be richer than Switzerland.
Yeah, I don't think they know what the answers are, and the giant elephant in the room that they are terrified to mention the name of is Brexit, which is without a doubt having a massive impact across so many different businesses throughout the length and breadth of the UK. So that's the, and of course they're all thoroughly committed to probably even amplifying the Brexit nightmare rather than trying to address the problems that it's created. So I don't see any way out of it with whoever takes over as PM in the UK. There is a way out of it for Scotland. We need to get back into Europe, and that's through independence. So it's a much clearer route for us. But yeah, it's not going to be resolved until they tackle the problems that Brexit's caused. And at the moment, they won't even admit Brexit's causing a problem.
Absolutely, Martin. And actually, I was going to talk to you about that. Speaking in a sense hypothetically, how do you think the Scottish government of an independent Scotland might address the shrinking investment and the very low productivity that it's likely to inherit from Westminster?
Well, thankfully, there's a lot of international examples of good practice and work that's happening throughout Europe and further afield that shows what we can do if we do similar measures, and it's up to us to come up with the measures that best fit our economy. And we've got the wit and the intelligence and the resources to do that. So I think that'll be a very positive experience in the years ahead, and I look forward to seeing that develop. But the key thing is we've just got to get away from the madness.
Completely. Thanks, Martyn. Thank you. Now then, also with regard to the Tory cost of living crisis, responding to research from the motoring group the RAC showing that the fuel tax cut in the UK is one of the lowest in Europe, the SNP has repeated its call for fuel duty regulation and more targeted support for those on the lowest incomes. The RAC has said that the UK government has given some of the least generous support in the whole of Europe. Out of 13 European nations that have cut tax on petrol, only Luxembourg has done less than the UK. The UK cut fuel duty by 5 pence a litre in March, but according to the RAC, this is paltry compared to other European countries. Germany has taken the equivalent of 25 pence a litre in tax off petrol, Italy 21 pence, Portugal 16 pence, and both Ireland and the Netherlands had cut petrol duty by nearly 15 pence. Other governments have introduced fuel discounts that take effect when motorists are paying at forecourt tills, with Spain cutting prices by about 17 pence a litre and France 15 pence a litre. Commenting, the SNP's transport spokesperson Gavin Newlands MP said, forecourt costs, on top of rising energy and food costs, are hammering the finances of households and businesses across Scotland and the UK. And today we learned that almost half of Scots have nothing left to cut back on in the face of further energy price hikes. Yet the UK government and the two Tory candidates vying to be the next UK Prime Minister are bringing nothing to the table to support people financially through this Tory-made cost of living crisis. So, Martyn, the RAC's fuel spokesperson Simon Williams said that the analysis amounted to an uncomfortable truth for the UK government and said it's frustrating that repeated calls to the UK government for more support are falling on deaf ears. Simon Williams is right, deaf ears is right, or at least is it ears that are only listening to the Tory leadership hustings and are ignoring everything else?
Yeah, well, that's definitely it. They play the populist card, and their current audience is a very small audience. I think it's 0.2% of the Scottish population have a vote in that leadership, so our views are pretty much irrelevant to them. But the whole fuel issue is one that needs tackled, and the fuel duty regulator would be one way of doing it. The 5 pence reduction in the litre of fuel was just smoke and mirrors from the UK because they made up for that cut with the additional VAT take on it. So it's all, smoke and mirrors. People try to pretend that they're actually delivering something for people when they're not. They're just taking more out of people's pockets, and they need to address it because the fuel costs impact the costs on everything that's in the shops. The goods that get delivered, everything's, there's this multiplier effect out there that's people are being hammered by. Now, clearly, in the long term, we need to get away from this reliance on the fossil fuels, and we need to get into the public transport and electric vehicles, all the more positive aspects. But until we get there, we've got to tackle the fuel prices.
Thank you, Martyn. And the RAC's fuel spokesperson Simon Williams also said UK pump prices might be finally starting to fall, but the reductions so far are too little and too late, given the massive wholesale price drops retailers have been benefiting from for nearly 2 months. Now, we were reporting last week on the astonishing profits that oil and gas majors are making at the moment, doubling the profits that they made last
Yeah.
year, and far exceeding any of their plans. And here we're hearing now about petrol retailers profiteering and benefiting from wholesale price drops 2 months ago. So big oil and its retailers profiteering. Is that now? Does that indicate that there's a need now to do something rather more significant to manage and control the profiteering that they are enjoying just now?
Absolutely, and we've back calls for a windfall tax. I think, when people make an exceptional profit that is not based on just hard graft and just reward, then they should be taxed on that. And clearly, this is a prime example that I think everybody can see the benefit that would be resulting to society from that. There is no justification for the rip-offs that people are being faced on one hand by the energy companies and on the other hand by the UK government.
Thank you, Martin. And as I mentioned, figures suggest that in a league table of European governments that have taken action to slash petrol taxes,
Mm.
only Luxembourg performed worse, with 11 countries offering more generous assistance. Is that position in that league table of shame? Is that symptomatic of wider either inactivity or incompetence at Westminster?
I'm always one to find any fault with Westminster and highlight it. Although I think if we're trying to be fair, you have to look at every country's situation, and probably Luxembourg has a lot less road use and mileage consumption than we do here. So perhaps theirs is justified. Westminster's is a bit more difficult to justify because for the reasons we've already gone through with the VAT on fuel, the lack of a price fuel duty regulator, and the impact on our haulage industry combined with the Brexit problem. So there is something that they need to do to tackle the problems that have been created in this country. And it's finding tailored solutions, I think, for everybody's needs. So I'm always wary of league tables because you've got to look at the different situations behind them. But yeah, we know we're suffering and we need an answer that suits our situation.
Absolutely. Thank you, Martin. Now, for a moment, we'll stop talking about the Tory cost of living crisis, and instead we'll move to the Balkans because the Kosovo
Mm.
government has postponed implementation of a decision that would require Serbs who live in the north of Kosovo to apply for a car license plates issued by Pristina institutions after armed Serbs fired shots in the air and set up roadblocks. Late on Sunday, Serb nationalists parked trucks filled with gravel and other heavy machinery on roads leading to two border crossings at Jarinje and Bernjak, in a territory where Serbs form a majority. Kosovo police said they had to close the border crossings. The overall security situation in the northern municipalities of Kosovo is tense, the NATO led mission to Kosovo, KFOR, said in a statement. The statement said KFOR was monitoring closely and prepared to intervene if stability is jeopardised. 14 years after Kosovo declared independence from Serbia, 50,000 Serbs living in the north still use licence plates and documents issued by Serbian authorities, refusing to recognise institutions in the capital, Pristina. Kosovo has been recognised as an independent state by more than 100 countries, but not by Serbia or by Russia. The Kosovo government of Prime Minister Albin Kurti has said it would give Serbs a transitional period of 60 days to get Kosovo licence plates, 1 year after giving up trying to impose them due to similar protests. The government also decided that as of the 1st of August, all citizens from Serbia visiting Kosovo would have to get an extra document at the border to grant them permission to enter. A similar rule is applied by Belgrade authorities to Kosovars who want to visit Serbia. But following tensions on Sunday evening and consultations with EU and US ambassadors, the government said it would delay its plan for 1 month and start implementation on the 1st of September. The European Union's foreign policy chief Josep Borrell, welcomed the delay. So, Martin, firstly, KFOR said in a statement that it was monitoring the situation closely and was prepared to intervene if stability was jeopardised. Now, we're not very long past the anniversary of the massacre at Srebrenica. Do you think that there's a prospect that lessons in NATO and in KFOR have been learned in order that they intervene if stability is jeopardised in a way that is effective?
I certainly hope that lessons have been learned. It's obviously a very fragile situation with long running and deep rooted aggressions between the different communities that make up that country, and it's one that they're going to have to find a way through. So hopefully this delay and taking a slightly softer approach might lead to that, but it's a problem they're going to have to resolve themselves, unfortunately. And if hopefully without the terrible crimes that happened in the past being repeated. There has to be lessons from that. I mean, the world is watching. You know, that's probably the message we need to be sending to.
That's a very good point, Martin. Thank you. I mentioned Josep Borrell there, who's welcomed the delay and also said that issues should be addressed through EU facilitated dialogue and focus on comprehensive normalisation of relations between Kosovo and Serbia, which was essential for both their EU integration paths. So I wonder, is that one of the possible answers here to maybe consider accelerating the accession of these countries to the EU and thereby providing a framework for comprehensive normalisation of relations? I'm thinking in part about how important the role and participation of the EU was in establishing the Good Friday Agreement on the island of
Mhm.
Ireland.
Yeah, it may well be talk and dialogue is always the preferred option, I think, for most of us in society, and we've got to make sure that that's what happens. And if the world can help push people in that direction, then that's what they should be doing. And yeah, I would certainly welcome seeing those kind of moves afoot.
Thanks, Martin. For our next item, we'll travel even further afield because an Indigenous Australian parliamentarian was instructed to retake her oath of office on Monday after she changed it to label the Queen a coloniser. The Greens Senator Lydia Thorpe told Parliament's upper house with her right fist raised above her head that she would bear true allegiance to the colonising Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. The Senate President Sue Lines told Ms Thorpe, who is a Jaburang Gunai Gunjit Jamara woman, that she was required to recite the affirmation as written. After a pause, Ms Thorpe, a senator since September 2020 who retained her seat at a federal election in May, recited the affirmation, this time without the ad-lib. Australia's Indigenous leaders have toiled for generations to win recognition for injustices suffered by their peoples since European colonisation began in the 1700s. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is seeking to make changes to the Australian Constitution to recognise Indigenous minorities and require the government to consult Aboriginal people on decisions that impact their lives. So, Martin, firstly, the Assistant Minister for the Republic, Matt Thistlethwaite, last week told newspapers that swearing allegiance to the Queen was archaic and ridiculous. He said it does not represent the Australia we live in, and it's further evidence of why we need to begin discussing becoming a republic with our own head of state. We are no longer British, he said. Do you have any sympathy for Mr. Thistlethwaite?
I do, yeah. I mean, that seems a pretty the whole oath of allegiance is a bit anachronistic. We have to swear one at Westminster as well in order to take our seats, and it's what you have to do in order to represent your constituents, and it does stick in the throat a wee bit because we take our authority from the electorate. The people in Scotland are sovereign, and they send us there to do a job. So you have to swear this oath of allegiance to a monarch. But it's I take comfort from the fact that it's in accordance to laws, and I think well we can always change the laws and we could abolish the monarchy. Therefore, I can fool it in order to do the job that I've got to do. But yeah, it's an anachronism from a bygone age. The people that we owe our allegiance to is the public that send us to represent them, and that's the reality for all politics, irrespective of how it's dressed up or the pantomime that goes on around oaths and pageantry.
Absolutely, Martin. That I was wondering about that because whether there were similar issues for MPs swearing the oath of allegiance in Westminster. I think you took the oath in the Scottish form in 2015, is my
Yep,
recollection.
yep.
But as you've said, very much the same issues, and it's something that has to be told in order to then effectively represent your constituents, so that you've little choice in that sense. But thinking of the broader issues here, is this story an indication, do you think, of rising support for republicanism in Australia, and perhaps to follow Barbados in removing the Queen as head of state?
Well, it may well be. I mean, I obviously I'm not even going to pretend that I can speak for Australians. I do have relatives that are in Australia. I'm sure their views have been more important on this issue than mine. But on reading the press coverage of that incident on the swearing in, I apologise that I can't remember the name of the other senator that was commented saying that it sticks in all our throats or something like that. So I think there's obviously a
Mm,
wider
yeah.
feeling than just this one individual that's made a protest, whether that's right or wrong. It's certainly attracted a fair bit of media coverage, so it's achieved a political objective, if nothing else. And she's not alone in that thought. Clearly in Australia.
I think that's absolutely right. Thanks, Martin. We'll come back home now for our next news item because a measure to help maintain the availability of long term residential housing in Edinburgh has been approved. Edinburgh will become Scotland's first designated short term let control area after the Scottish Government approved the City of Edinburgh Council's proposed change to planning requirements. The control area is intended to preserve the character of neighbourhoods, prevent short-term lets in inappropriate places or types of building, and help ensure homes are used to their best effect. With a few exceptions, changing the use of an entire residential home in the city to short-term letting will automatically require planning permission. The control area covers the entire City of Edinburgh Council area. Where a dwelling house is in the control area, a change of use to secondary letting will always require planning permission unless the exceptions set out in the legislation apply. Where the change of a dwelling house to a short-term let took place before the designation of the control area, the existing planning rules will apply. These require planning permission for a change of use of property where that change is a material change in the use of the property. Discretionary powers enabling local authorities to designate short-term let control areas came into effect in 2021. Separate legislation introducing a mandatory licensing scheme for all short-term lets in Scotland was also approved earlier this year. From the 1st of October 2022, new hosts must obtain a licence from their local authority before they operate as a short-term let. So, Martyn, the current council leader in Edinburgh, Cammy Day, said that for far too long, too many homes have been lost in our city to the holiday market. He said, in fact, around a third of all short-term lets in Scotland are in the capital. So their associated issues of safety, antisocial behaviour and noise have a detrimental effect on many residents. So a third of all the short-term let properties in the whole of Scotland are in Edinburgh. Is that is it fair to say that's irrefutable evidence that there's a problem here?
Well, I'm not going to dispute those figures. I think there's clearly an issue. I don't want to also be a hypocrite either. I've just came back from a short break where I've been Airbnb myself, but I think it has to be controlled, and particularly if it's on a scale that Edinburgh clearly is experiencing. So I think this is the right type of thing to be doing, and I'm pleased to see it coming into effect.
Thanks, Martyn. These plans were described as restrictive and anti-business by the Association of Scotland Self-Caterers, who said that the city's real problem was a lack of house building. Now, there's two aspects to that. How do you build more homes in the old town? And where I am, I'm in Edinburgh West. There are 17,000 homes being built in this constituency alone at the moment. So, are the self caterers lobby group? Are they making any sense here? Complaining, suggesting that the problem is the lack of house building in the old town
Well,
and in the west of Edinburgh, where there are thousands of houses being built.
I mean, it's clearly it's an issue of supply and demand, and there's a demand for people to live locally in their existing communities, and there is a demand from the tourist sector for accommodation. So, if you've got a shortage of properties, which one do you give priority to? And I think well, I would certainly err on the side of supporting the local community, maintaining its links and its establishment. So I think this is the correct approach, but yes, to be fair, there's probably an element that there's increased demand, and particularly with so many staycations as well as the international market opening up, that there is demand for additional short lets as well. But you've got to look after, if you've got competing priorities, you've got to pick one.
Absolutely, there's a choice to be made there, Martyn. The Edinburgh Council leader also said that they were now going to investigate whether they could introduce a cap on the total number of short-term let properties in the city, and go further. So, do you think is it justified either to expand the use of short-term let control areas into other parts of Scotland? I'm thinking perhaps of the areas in the Western Isles and more rural parts of the country where we know housing shortages are probably even more acute than they are in the old town in Edinburgh. So, do you think should further restrictions be introduced elsewhere in Scotland, and should there be an increase in the restrictions in this first short-term let control area in Edinburgh?
I think I think what we're seeing here is a very useful tool in the box for addressing certain problems, and I think we should see how this works in Edinburgh, and if it's successful, then yeah, it probably should be rolled out in other areas where there's real pressure on local communities. It's getting that balance right. And clearly Edinburgh has a totally different scale from anywhere else in the country. So this is, if it's going to work, we'll see it work here. So fingers crossed.
Thanks, Martyn. And for our final item this evening, we'll stay in Edinburgh because police in Edinburgh have launched Operation Summer City 2022 to keep the public safe during the Edinburgh International Festival, the Fringe, and the Tattoo. Following the COVID pandemic, all events associated with the festivals were cancelled in 2020, and a far more restricted and limited events were held in 2021. This year, the festival is returning to full capacity, and that will see the population of the capital double, with 1 million people expected to visit or stay in Edinburgh over the coming month. As such, the police will have a high visibility presence within the city centre throughout August and will be on hand to offer reassurance to the public, deter criminal activity, and address any incidents that may arise. Returning to the city centre this year will be unofficial fringe venues 999, mobile police stations that will be based in Hunter Square and Printer Street Gardens East. Members of the public looking to obtain crime prevention advice, inquire about lost and found property, or to report a crime can visit these facilities, as well as the other traditional methods for contacting the police. Over the course of the festival, the Edinburgh Police Division social media channels will be utilised to promote a range of personal safety information videos aimed at ensuring the public are able to minimise their risk of falling victim to crime or becoming involved in one. So, Martyn, this is an indication of Edinburgh beginning to spool up for the festivals, which are now beginning, and an influx of visitors in a way that we've not seen for a couple of years. In broad terms, not thinking about policing in particular, but in broad terms, do you think is the cost and the hassle of the festivals as they are currently configured in Edinburgh, is the cost and the hassle worth it?
I think probably they are worth it. I mean, it's a window that the world sees the capital city of our nation on. It attracts in lots of tourism business, both internally and, of course, internationally. All of that's to be welcomed. That's what you would expect in any major thriving city, and certainly this is our capital, and we should be expecting to see that as this commonplace. I think where I have sometimes concerns on policing is when we have other types of international diplomatic events where that puts a burden on our Scottish policing that isn't quite the same benefit. But these things all need to be covered. So yeah, I think generally pretty positive, and that's the kind of community policing that I would be wanting to see at major events, and Scottish police have a great reputation for managing these things without aggro and bother, and this is a prime example of how they do it.
Well, that's a very good point, Martyn. I certainly know many other countries are envious of the scale and the depth and the breadth of the festivals that take place in Edinburgh in August. But to expand on the point I think you were making there, do you think that we are overstretching? Well, the point is at the moment resources are finite. Scotland has maintained police force levels much more so than in England, but nevertheless, do you think is there a risk here that we are overstretching our police resources, who have many responsibilities? And do you think should venues and promoters operating in Edinburgh during the festival, should they be required to contribute more, either financially or in terms of different arrangements?
Well, that's an interesting point. I mean, obviously, ultimately, we all pay for the policing because that's paid out of taxation, and that's the way it should be. So we should be doing everything we can to support businesses and tourism, and yeah, why would we put an additional burden purely on them when it's society as a whole that needs police? So no, I wouldn't.
That's a good.
I'd a charge them, but.
That's a good. That's a good point, Martyn. And more generally, thinking now not about policing, but about the official festival, the book festival, the Fringe, the Tattoo, the Jazz Festival, and all the other events that will take place in Edinburgh during the month of August this year. Is there anything that you're particularly looking forward to?
Well, would you believe I haven't looked at any of the programs yet, but I dare say we will find our way in, one weekend or so, just to soak up the atmosphere. And we're only a stone's throw away from the city, so we'll inevitably see something of it. And who knows?
Well, I think it's fair to say the House of Commons has only just risen, and gone into recess. So you've had one or two other priorities rather than perusing the programmes for the events in August. But I'm sure that you'll find, if you once you've got a chance to have a look, I'm sure that you'll find something that you and the family are keen to come and see, and I hope you enjoy it as well.
Yeah,
But
absolutely. I was going to say
that's all. Go on, Martyn. Say it.
I was going to say I'll need to look up for some genuine satire, because I'm not used to the real political satire going on. I need to see what the comedy is meant to look like again.
Yes, it can be difficult to distinguish from what's happening in Westminster, but yes, some actual proper satire, that would be refreshing. Absolutely. But that's all that we have time for this evening. In making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland relies on the support of viewers and others who value our distinctive approach to news, current affairs and culture. Please help us to continue to make these programmes, to continue to develop the station and to make new programmes for you. If you would like to support us, then please subscribe or donate to Broadcasting Scotland. You will find the link to do that on the screen now. Our appeals for your assistance continue on Facebook and Twitter, because the urgent need for that financial support has not gone away. There are other ways in which you can contribute to our work. If you would like to volunteer to work with Broadcasting Scotland, either behind the scenes or in front of the cameras, or in any other way that helps our work and promotes the station, then please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot and send us a message there. You can find us on Twitter at BroadcastScot. Please like and retweet us there, and you can also find us on Facebook by searching for Broadcasting Scotland. When you're watching us on YouTube, it would be great if you would like and subscribe to Broadcasting Scotland on that platform. Meantime, we will be here again tomorrow evening with the next edition of Scotland at 7, so please tune in and join us again then. And that's the way it is at very nearly Scotland at 8. I'd like to say thank you to everyone who's been watching this evening, and in particular, a very special thanks to our very special guest, Martyn Day MP. Thanks, Martyn.
No problem.
As it's the 1st of August today, I'm going to mention that this is the anniversary of the Prescription Act, which was brought into force in 1747. It said that no man or boy within the part of Great Britain called Scotland will wear or put on the clothes commonly called Highland clothes. That is to say, the plaid, philibeg or little kilt, trews, shoulder belts, or any part whatsoever of what peculiarly belongs to the Highland garb, and that no tartan or party-coloured plaid or stuff shall be used for greatcoats or for upper coats. For transgressing that act, which for the first time included Highland dress, the punishment was 6 months in jail, or on a second offence, transportation to any of His Majesty's plantations beyond the seas, and there to remain for a space of 7 years. I'm away to put on my kilt to make a point, and I hope that you have a very peaceful evening and can join us again here on Broadcasting Scotland very soon. Bye-bye.